Yeah, self-actualization is the way things are going. It's not just a psychological theory, but in reality, there is a there is a view that can be had of life and of humanity from which you can see that all there is that's happening is awakening. That's all there is that's happening. You could call it self-actualization, and that's all there is that's happening, even though it may be the case that there is only a small percentage of people who are actively involved in practicing meditation the way you are, right? But no matter who you are or where you are in the world, and no matter what the circumstances are that you're in, it's all the same process here. It's all, that all of the challenges that are faced in a human life are there in order for a human being to mature, in order for a human being to come to fulfillment of the possibility of being in the world. All of the things that happen in a human life are there to stimulate. See, snakes, and I think it's turtles, and there are a lot of animals like this, that they get to a place where they're growing and they're too big for their shell or they're too big for their skin, and then their skin has to shed, right, so that they can continue to evolve, right? Obviously, the one of the most popular examples of evolution or transformation, if you want to call it that, is the caterpillar turning into a butterfly. And so, for a human being, that process in which the skin that you're in is too tight, is a psychological and emotional process that happens in the world, and the more you learn, the more you're aware of the true nature of who you are and the way things really are, that skin is tighter. You feel more limited and contracted into this little way of being in the world that is fragile and fearful and reactive and constantly trying to be in control, scurrying with inactivity to try and get this thing to work somehow, figure this thing out, get it to work somehow. And and we're born into a conditioned reality in which that's what we have to operate with. The world we're in is what we have to operate with, right? So you're looking in that world for options and choices, and that can go on for a lifetime, and you can go on switching and changing, and but the more things change, the more they stay the same in this regard, because you're still in the condition. You're still in the limited, contracted state that is the first stage of a human life. And in order to get out of that state, you have to come to a place where you're disenchanted and disillusioned. You're not going to play anymore. You're not going to continue to do more and more and more of what's out there. You're not going to keep buying stuff on the internet. You're not going to keep trying new things. You're not going to keep changing your relationships. You're not going to keep hoping. You're not going to keep praying. You're not going to keep looking for a way out of this. You're not going to. You get to a place where you're disillusioned with the whole thing, and you just feel like, I've seen enough to know that this isn't going anywhere. It keeps cycling. Every time I find the answer, it becomes the next problem. So it's a setup in a sense, right? Life is a setup. And the intention is in the setup, it's a natural thing for human beings. In nature, when the circumstances change, nature follows, nature follows the circumstances. The difference between that, since we've separated ourselves the way we have from nature, we no longer flow with it. We no longer change in a natural way. We've lost contact with a lot of earlier civilizations that had more of an idea about how to be natural and be like nature and to evolve and to fulfill the possibility of a human being and become a spiritual entity. But the more you're separated from that natural thing, it's not, the thing about a human being is that other forms of life will just, their connection with nature is such that they just follow the flow of the whole thing. There's no, my dog is not trying to be a better dog. They just follow the nature of being a dog. They're just doing that. Right? So if you mature, then you realize that the first phase of life was the phase in which you had to learn to play the game. The first phase of life is you had to take on the identity of a body and take on the identity of a personality so that you can enter into this world, right, and interact with this world. But that's just the first phase. Now, for most of humanity, they don't see it as the first phase. They think, well, that's the end of that. The world is all there is, and the way it is, is that I am a physical body and I am a person in this world. And so that's the end of it for a lot of people, and that's what just keeps recycling in terms of the stuff that you see in the news every night. But it is possible to see beyond that and understand that there is another phase of life in which you now discover that you are not that. You are not only a body. You see, I have said here in the past that, you're not a body, and you hear a lot of teachers talk like this, you're not a body, you're not a person, and so forth. And you can build a whole teaching on that. And it's not that that's not the case, but that's kind of the beginning of a teaching. But if you go on with the teaching, you find out that, well, you are a body, right? We say you're not a body because you're so locked into identifying with being a body and so locked into identifying with being a person that we take the extreme opposite of that to try and bring you out of that, right? You're not a body, you're not a person, right? But then the next phase from that, as you continue with the process, is you've got to come around, the enso has to complete itself. The enso, right, the enso, you probably know what an enso is, even if you don't know, you know. It's that circle that you see in Zen paintings all the time, right? It's a circle, right? And that's so popular because that circle represents the process. You start out at birth, right? You start out at birth as a awareness in the world, but in the beginning you're just awareness, right? And then you go through this whole process and you come around and you end up back as awareness again, right? So that's the enso. That's why they have the circle. You end up back at where you started again, right? Why? Because there's no place, you never really went anywhere. That's why, right? So what this is about is if once you recognize that you are a body, but that's a very limited contraction. That's a very limited expression of what you are. And you are a person, and that's a very limited expression of what you are. And if you identify with that and you don't discover yourself to be other than that, then there will be suffering because you're living in a gross reality in which the physical world the laws of physicality will apply to you, right? You have to deal with gravity, you have to deal with time, you have to deal with all the things that are going to cause life to be difficult and challenging. And again, all those things are really part of the soup necessary. And that soup needs to cook, that soup needs to boil, right, in order for you to wake up and come out of it. You have to be interested. You have to give up on this idea that this is reality. And since it really isn't reality, if you just become disillusioned and you don't consider it to be reality, you start to study and you start to learn about what the possibilities are, even if you do that from a scientific approach using quantum mechanics, that'll really take you to the same place and coming to understand what's really going on here. And then if you get to a place where you see it for what it is, then you can start to watch how it is happening. Then you can start to watch how it's happening. You can start to watch how, because you keep being confused about reality, how because you keep thinking you're the thinker, how because you keep thinking you're in control when you're not, how because you keep relating to life in the world the way you were conditioned to do it, that's causing you to be miserable. It can't be otherwise than that, because it's limited. It's just limited. There is love. There's love that is known by the limited version of a human being. There's love that is known by the limited version of a human being. Pretty much is considered romantic love, right? It's what all the country and western songs are about, right? We're really, when you really step back and look at it, we're really obsessed with this sexuality and romantic love, aren't we? I mean, it's the biggest business on the planet, isn't it? Right? We're obsessed with that. It's almost as if, okay, if this is really reality, if this world is really all there is, and if I'm my body, and if we are separate from one another, then romantic love is the thing that I want most, because it allows me to feel a sense of being connected to somebody else. I'm not alone anymore, like that, right? But that's a very limited version of love. And for a lot of people who never wake up, they hear about other possibilities, but that they really don't get that. They are still pretty much investing all their energy in the limited form of love. Romantic love. It's wonderful, it's wonderful when you fall into it, it's wonderful when you experience the passion of it and and the sexual pleasure of it and all that. It's hypnotizing, it's wonderful, right? But it's limited, and in the end it will fail. It does. It really does. In the end it will fail, because more than anything, it's in your DNA to get you to have sex so that our human beings can procreate, and it's a survival. It's part of your survival mechanism to have sex, right? So you're set up in a way where you will do it in order to procreate, and of course, because of the fact that people are so desperate to experience satisfaction and well-being and pleasure, it can become an obsession like everything else, right? And of course, it doesn't last. I mean, anybody that's been married finds that out. Romantic love doesn't last, and and that's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way it is. When the fall comes and the temperatures lower, the leaves fall. Right? In a marriage, when you're together for a while and the temperatures fall, then you're not as hot anymore. You're not as passionate anymore. You're not as turned on anymore. All of that stuff that went on that you thought you had something to do with starts to come apart, because you didn't have anything to do with it. You did fall in love. So there's this other love that comes along when you start to wake up and you understand the possibility of love. You understand, because unconditional love is just another way of talking about the way you are. That's all. It's just a way of talking about the way you are, because awareness is unconditional love, meaning that awareness has unconditional acceptance of everything as it is all the time. And that's freedom. That's the freedom. That is the unlimited version of being a human being. Because then you're not just a human being, you're a spiritual being. And that's the evolution to the next phase of life for a human being. So that's why we're meditating. Yeah. Love is what you are, it's not something you do. And the more this becomes evident to you through practicing meditation, the more it will express itself in the way you're relating to other people. So you stop relating to other people. It's literally a matter of stopping relating to other people as other people. There is no other people. That's actually something, somebody said a question to one of the spiritual teachers, something about how do you manage your relationships with other people? And the spiritual teacher said, there is no other people. And that's the way it is. The problem with that is that when the shit hits the fan, when your wife or your husband or your daughter or your sister or your brother or your mother or your father, stimulates your programming for reaction and survival and all, that stuff, that's the idea that there is nobody else, that goes out the window. That's not available. And so it really does require that you have to break out of the shell or the limitation or the conditioning or the state of mind that you're in, right, that you have been consistently practicing and trying to make work. And it is so completely hypnotic. It's really important to understand how much of a trance it is. You have to start to take responsibility for the truth, not just know about it. So you have to start to be willing to get to a place in your awareness where, as you're going through your life, you're seeing in real time, as you're being involved with people in predicaments and situations, you're seeing it for what it is. You're seeing that it's unworkable. You're seeing the games that are being played, the pretenses. You're seeing the reactions. You're seeing the limitations, right? And that's all that's necessary, by the way. You don't have to condemn yourself for being that way. You don't have to make yourself bad and wrong because you have a mind that judges and evaluates everything. All you have to do is see things for what they are, and that's why meditation is so powerful. All you have to do is be able to stay present to things as they are, and they will clear up. You don't have to. See, if you think you have to do something, then you're perpetuating the ghost. If you think you have to do something, then you're perpetuating the idea that you are this person who has to change and has to do things better and has to stop doing things that are destructive and has to, all that stuff. Nothing wrong with that. It's better that you're a better person than not a better person. Nothing wrong with that, right? But that's limited, and it's not going to resolve everything. What we're talking about here is getting to what the teachers call the root of the problem, the root problem. I remember that from Vipassana meditation training, where they talked about the fact that this practice is about getting to the root problem, the essential problem, not trying to fix the symptoms of the problem, but get to the heart of the matter, to the root problem. And the root problem is the confusion about reality and the confusion about who you are. And you can understand, if you've been to this class for a while and if you've been reading books or looking at YouTube and you apply your intellect, you can understand, and I've said it here before, there is a teaching that is irrefutable. When I talk, for example, to you about the fact that you're not the voice in your head, that's irrefutable. Nobody can argue about that and win the argument. The evidence is irrefutable that that's the case. And so there are things that you can learn and you can deepen your understanding of things, but then the practice, the reality that makes available can only be had if you undo the conditioning, if you deconstruct the mental states that exist, if you stop identifying with the patterns and the thoughts and the emotions that come up. And that's where the meditation comes in. It's a natural process. It's happening everywhere all the time to all of humanity. And you're fortunate enough to be, in a more advanced position about the whole thing. And let me tell you something, as far as I can tell, it's a very small percentage of humanity that's in an advanced position about this whole thing. And you happen to be among them, so don't blow the opportunity that it is, you know what I mean? But if you're not going to blow the opportunity that it is, then you have to take it seriously and you have to make your practice matter. That's why it's not just a matter of following the way you practice, it's a matter of taking responsibility. It's your practice and you're doing it for you. You're doing it because you want to be awake and you know what it costs you not to be awake.